Hello and welcome to Rule of Carnage, a conversation between myself, Mike Hutchinson, and Glenn Ford, who should be seated on one or other side of me. We are here to talk about designing better skirmish games. And what is the topic of conversation today? Well, I shall tell you, Glenn. It is the continuation of a conversation about playtesting. We waxed lyrical in the previous video, or if you're listening to this as a podcast, the previous moment ago, on the sort of guidelines and rules around how you should approach playtesting in order to get the most delicious orange juice wrung from it. I suppose in this half of the conversation, let's talk a bit more about I guess a few topics. One is, what are the sort of different kinds of playtesting you might get stuck into? A bit more of a personal reflection on some of the processes that we have been through in our playtesting experiences. And I suppose on the way, we'll just maybe reflect a little bit of our personal stories and the ghastly horrors that we have uncovered during our own playtesting. Goodness. So as we said before in the last video, playtesting is the unavoidable link between the terrible first version, which you currently think is good, and the actually good final version of your game. And in between those 2 points on the map are the grueling experience of having other people tear your darling to pieces and tell you exactly how unfun it is. But you must do it in order to get to that final place. So, Glenathan, why don't you tell us about, I guess, some different categories of playtesting that you might engage within?
Okay, so the playtesting we've been talking about over the previous part of this conversation is what I might call the sort of standard version of playtesting. You sit down with other people, you're in the same room as them, or behind mirrored glass, or whatever your personal
Never
setup
done that.
is, and and you play through the game.
You're hiding under the table, listening to them.
Hasbro used to apparently have rooms with two-way mirrors in it, and when Matt Leacock, I think it was, when he was doing Risk Legacy, used to sit behind mirrored glass watching people play it. And then when he sort of went out to Z-Man Games and they didn't have those sorts of things, he's apparently very good at sitting in the corner of the room quietly taking notes.
Repeat Matt Leacock.
I mean, yeah. But anyway, whatever your personal process is, you're there with other people. You're there, they're there. Game gets played. Whether they're total strangers to the game and it's a full intro of a new game, whether you're trusted compadres and you're working them like dogs to go through one particular part of the system. That's your core play testing. There are some other sorts of testing that I like to think of within my process of when I'm running through a game, and there are two that I think come before sort of core testing for a couple of reasons, and there's one that should come after. There's probably what most people go through and spend most of their time doing on in a game, which is what I like to call sort of head testing it, where you run through the various iterations and relationships. And that's something that should be going on throughout your game, and I think it should go on throughout standard playtesting, because it's not a non-thing to armchair playtest a game. It can save you a lot of time. I mean, I remember there were various points during Gaslands where, luckily, I think Mike trusts me to a certain degree, where I could walk up to him and say, this thing here, we don't need to put on the tabletop. That needs fixing.
Mm-hmm.
And there were one or two playtest sessions where somebody insisted on putting one of those things on the tabletop and proving it was broken. And it's a totally wasted hour of valuable playtesting. Because it's like, look, I trust you. I can see the argument you made. I've done the maths. You're right. That needs fixing. You do not need to physically prove it to me. You don't need to put us both through that, to show that you've done that. And I think that, if you're anything like me, when I'm designing a game, it's what I do when I'm not thinking about anything else. Mm-hmm. It's the thing, the hamster wheel that's running in the back of your head. And you're going to end up testing through scenarios. And don't commit yourself to physically testing it through if you've realized that there's bunk inherently in it. Just because you wrote it, it's not precious. You don't need to prove to yourself that it's garbage. Accept what you know. Keep doing that armchair testing and retesting. And largely because I think,
or if you're like me and you don't do the armchair testing quite as cerebrally, like I will quite often get to like activation 3 of a playtesting game and go, oops, and then I'll just kill the game there and I'll go and scratch my head and figure out, because I'm a bit more of a visual, tactile learner.
yeah, I mean, yeah, the second stage I would say is solo playtesting. Solo playtest your game before you bring it to other people, please, because as I said before, playtesters are an important resource. And personally, I wouldn't put something in front of another person until I had run it on the tabletop myself. Because I've never written something that didn't collapse under its own weight. Even now, there's always one thing where you just go, oh, right, sorry, that's bunk. That doesn't work. I missed out a thing, on those solo playtests. So run it through solo. In fact, in my experience, the majority of the testing I ever took part in on Gaslands was solo playtesting. I used to run through games of Gaslands, back to back and back to back and back to back.
In fact, you probably solo playtested it more than I did.
I mean, there's a very solid.
I hadn't really got my eye in on solo playtesting during Gaslands. I did a lot more of it in subsequent designs, but
yeah, no, yeah, I ran all the scenarios, all the teams, solo on Gaslands because, I mean, for one thing, it's just more time efficient. I can run through a game a lot more quickly on my own. It takes a certain amount of sort of weird cognitive dissonance to play all the teams and not have a favorite and not go, oh, I want those guys to win. But once you've managed to do that, and hopefully you'll get something valuable out of it, even if you do play your favorites better than all the other ones. You're going to need to solo play test.
So I talk
solo play test
quite a lot actually during those solo playtesting sessions. I sort of commentate and point things out to myself and then go and make a note how broken it was, to the point where I actually started back end of last year, or maybe the beginning of this, I started to think maybe in order to fill content for the Billion Suns sort of YouTube channel, maybe I'll record myself doing playtesting of that. And so I've recorded sort of 3 videos of that. They're actually terrible, and watching them back, I won't release them, but that sort of accentuated what I think I will try and make habitual, which is, as I am playtesting, I'm sort of speaking as if to as a sort of fictional YouTube audience, go, okay, so I'm going to try this and we'll see if this works, and oh my goodness, that's completely broken, and oh look, I found a gap in the rules over here, and making a little note to myself. Because I think that's what you're looking for, is you're looking for those bits where you tried to drive the car and you realize there wasn't any brakes on it, and you're just like, oops, better write the braking rules, because yeah.
Now, as I say, playtesters are a very important resource, and the first time your game gets playtested, it's going to fall to pieces. Give your playtesters the respect of doing that you're on your own in private in a corner where no one can see, and put up curtains and don't allow anybody in, for your own self-esteem as well as for your playtesters' patience, and run it through a few times until the basic wheels don't fall off. And then continue to iterate on your own. It is worth doing. There are things to learn as you solo test and solo retest. And so after you've done a bit of head testing and done a bit of solo testing, you're going to do a whole chunking shed load of the more standard testing. And then the last thing to sort of talk about is blind play testing. I remember hearing a conversation, I think, on the board game design podcast, where somebody said, oh, if you blind play tested your game, and the other guy was like, you mean like testing with people who are visually impaired? Blind play testing means giving the game to somebody and saying, not being in the room, not being anywhere near them. Blind play testing is most important to figure out if your rule book, as Mike was saying, your rule book is a program to be run on a Meet computer. And even if you are in the room being very silent and very out of the way, it's very hard to tell if people can run your rule book if you're in the room. I don't know why, but even just your presence.
Well, this comes back to the point I was making in the previous video, which is that everyone is lying to you, and people are programmed not to be absolute horrors to each other. And the thing is that if you do blind playtesting, and particularly if you get either a video report back or a battle report where someone has taken some notes, like the best thing that can happen is that two people try and play your game and just decide it is unplayable junk and that they hate you and your game and will never interact with anything you have ever made again. And no one will do that in front of you. Literally no one will do that in front of you unless they are an absolute psychotic, like antisocial crazy person. Because why would you? That would just be an unpleasant way to behave. But it's actually really critical and really interesting to understand that if two people just like pick up your game, read it, and just go, they might even not play it because they just read it and just go, that is garbage. In no way am I going to waste my time playing this garbage. Or they try and have fun and they desperately want it to be good and they put it on the table and go, Mike, Glenn, this was like, I wanted to love this, but it's horrible and I hate you.
This is true. I think if you're in the room, people make an effort to get through the game. They'll make an effort to be nice to each other, God forbid, and then they'll make an effort to enjoy the game and get to the end of it in a way that they won't necessarily if you're not there. But you need to get people to blind play test your game. You need to get people to blind test your rule book. More importantly. Blind testing is so valuable. If you're watching this video, you've played games, you know what rule books are sometimes and how they can be to get through. I'm not saying that all bad rule books didn't have enough blind play testing, but all good rule books did have enough blind play testing. I'll put it that way around. The thing about blind playtesting that's it's hard to get blind playtesters, and it's hard to get really good feedback off of blind playtesters. These days, as Mike's saying, you can get people to video their play session, you can get people to do audio recordings. Written feedback of blind playtesting is hard, I find, to get useful bits out of. I found that you tend to get people saying things like, I didn't get some of the rule book.
So what I love is going back to a previous point that I made in the last conversation about asking what sucked. Like, one of the things that I love most about getting written battle reports on Facebook is I can then at them and I can say, hey, that moment there, like somebody was providing some feedback. Some people were playing some feedback on A Billion Suns recently, and they had realized, because they're pretty like competitive tournament gamers, they'd realized that if you play for it, destroying jump gates in A Billion Suns can be a pretty like harsh way of kicking people out of the game. And so they provided a written battle report where they were like, hey, we kind of loved the game and we loved lots of things about it, but we had this really bad experience where like one person deployed a bunch of stuff and then the other person killed all the jump points and it was a terrible time. And then I got to ask a bunch of questions about, okay, so would this person have won if that hadn't have happened? Like, did it feel like they got a cheap victory? And like, it gives, like, particularly, because one of the questions I was going to ask you, Glenn, was like, where do you find arenas for blind playtesting? Like, how do you recruit blind testers? But if you are doing so on a social platform like Facebook or Board Game Geek, like following up with questions about, the battle report may be incomplete for your playtesting purposes, but like there'll be some moment of disappointment or dissonance somewhere in it, and like just pick at that scab and see what they tell you.
Yeah, I think that when you get a report that's about the qualitative nature of the game, I think that's fine. One of the issues with blind playtesting a rule book is that a lot of the information is more sort of quantitative, and one of the issues is that if someone played a game and got confused partway through it, and you ask them where they got confused, it's often really hard for people to remember where they got confused because they got confused, and some I've had situations where people say, there was a bit of the rules where I got confused. I'm not sure which of the things confused me, because I read them all and then I was confused,
Yeah.
and so I'm not quite sure where. So you
Yeah.
know, a video, a recording, watching the process of someone becoming confused is a lot more valuable than having them explain to you how they got confused and
Yes,
where they got.
I've been really lucky to have, because of YouTube. Like I've been really lucky to have people video themselves playtesting both Gaslands and Perilous Tales, and it is wonderful to watch people make a mistake or reach a point where they have an impasse with the rules, and then just like listen to them or watch them make the assumption that spins the game off sideways, where they're like, I can't really figure this out. All right, we'll just say this happens or whatever. And they're like, no, that's the opposite of what is supposed to happen. But like, there's your moment. And you never get that unless you've got some kind of like videoed blind play testing. So I guess, find some YouTubers to record your playtesting sessions.
Yes, yeah. If you look, if you can find people to record your playtesting sessions, because you've got a bit of a following, that's great. Places to find playtesters, social media, Board Game Geek, conventions. Look, you should be at conventions when conventions happen again in the world generally. You should be at conventions anyway. If you're designing a game that you hope to put out into the world, because you should be interacting with the community. But conventions are a great place to set up a table and have a complete stranger play through your game. Anywhere that you can go live. If you've got a store that runs games, set up a table in that store of your game and get strangers to pick it up. I mean, I think Gaslands was running at conventions for a year, 2 years or something prior to its
was,
release
but
date.
the most significant thing for Gaslands was I set up a website and I put a forum on that website. And I told people that if they wanted to playtest the game, they had to sign up for the forums, which meant they had a way of contacting me. And I did the same thing for A Billion Suns, but ended up much more heavily using Facebook for A Billion Suns, and got a humming sort of playtesting community going on for that. So I think, if you've got a website, stick a forum on it and ask people to sign up in order to get access to the playtest rules. And use a group like on Facebook or whatnot, or a Reddit group, whatever. Or
and look, reach out to people, ask, if there's someone that you respect, ask them to take a look at your rule book, post it in as many places as you possibly can or feel comfortable doing. And if it comes down to it, there are people who play test professionally, and you can pay people to play.
Can you?
Yeah, it's like 50 quid a session, and they'll do you 4 people with a video and a written report for that.
Swish.
So yeah, you can I say 50 quid, $50. I think usually, but yeah, if you can't get it otherwise, I would say that $50 will be some of the best money that you'll spend, because
particularly if they're professional playtesters, they'll know what to be looking for and what kind of stuff is valuable to get back on. So there are people who, although presumably on a channel about writing miniature skirmish games, they're probably, what you're talking about are more board game playtesting groups. I don't know how many.
I mean, the ones I know of primarily do board games, but I'm certain that there are similar services for skirmish miniatures games. We're just lucky to be in a position where we haven't needed to look into that. But
I love the fact that Games Workshop really caught onto this about 5 or 6 years ago and created a playtest group around Nottingham from like all of the fantastic, enthusiastic tournament gamers who had podcasts and YouTube channels and stuff, and they kind of brought those guys into the inner circle. And not only does that, and I suppose this is one thing I do want to catch on before we finish this conversation, not only do they get like hardcore gamers who are really big fans of that rule set giving them intricate feedback about it, but they also get ambassadors and kind of community sort of leaders to go and take and sort of wave the standard for that. And honestly, that is like, do not underestimate the impact of a core group of playtesters that sort of maybe outside of your immediate space. Like if you're doing this kind of blind playtesting, whether that's inviting people in on Board Game Geek or doing a forum or something, like for the few people that really, really like that game and really get into it, like they become incredible resources as standard bearers for that game. Like they are the people in those clubs in different parts of the world than you live in that will actually say, hey, that thing that I play tested and love is coming out now, and I really want to play it and I really want to get people involved. So I think a great playtesting relationship becomes a you know, an ambassador relationship as well.
I mean, at some point, I want to do a full conversation about the nature of I suppose, what's become a developer-designer relationship. For when
yeah,
we're
there's
on
enough to
games.
talk about there for a whole thing for sure.
Yeah, but I think that I think people will be interested in the question of when you come to the point of who do you show games to first, in what order do you show them to people, and what is it that makes you decide it's time to show them to that person? And have there been moments when you've shown something to somebody too early? Why have you regretted it? What did they do to you that made you regret it? Mike.
The answer is yes, people.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Let's do a
Short,
whole separate conversation about that, because I think the design relationship between your tightest group of play testers, or the people who are giving you the most regular and deeply cutting feedback, there's a lot to dig into there, which I think is different and interesting.
Yeah.
What's the most eye-opening or memorable playtesting experience you can recall from some of your designs?
I don't know. I think I mean, back with SSO, the first game that I put on Kickstarter, there was a point where so for the many people who aren't aware, SSO is a survival horror game where you take control of some crew members on a deserted spaceship that's having something horrendous happen to it, and you try and get them through the thing, and you've got different challenge decks that tell different stories.
In the context of this channel, it's a counters and cards.
It's a small boxed counts and cards game, and I thought it would be a good idea for that to seat up to 12 players. Because I saw no reason that a crunchy, survival horror elimination game shouldn't have 12 players. And Mike Hutchinson told me that I was a complete lunatic, and that if there was a player count that went up to 12, people would assume it was a party game. And when you asked them to do worker placement to survive a rogue AI killing you off, and especially since you're allowed to kill each other off, you would be misleading people about the experience. That was a very valuable piece of feedback for that game, right off the bat there. I think it's like I say, most of the useful feedback I've had over box games, because those are the things that I put out to the public. Again, with SSO, where I realized that it was better to just have people eliminated, but make it avoidable and a bad idea for everybody within the co-op nature of the game, rather than have people eliminated and then give them some sort of pathetic sop to keep them technically part of the game, but not, and just saying, yeah, it's better to just be brutal to people and say, this is a brutal game, you will like it or you won't. I think that's maybe one of the most valuable lessons, if I could put it into a single thing, is sometimes accept that not everybody's going to like everything you do.
I was going to say that's one of my key memories, is that we were in the middle of playtesting, perhaps towards the end of playtesting A Billion Suns, and this guy showed up to our local Canterbury wargaming club, and he'd been a wargamer for a while, but he just moved to the area, And he turned up to the club and he didn't have anyone to play with. I think he wanted to play like Flames of War or 40k. And we roped him into 2 games of A Billion Suns. And he played A Billion Suns. And then he said that he wasn't going to turn up to the club anymore.
Yeah.
And then I knew.
No, I think the thing is, if you try to please everybody, you're not going to make anybody raving out of their mind fans of what you've done. You know, you're better off making something that some people won't like, because they don't have to buy it. And
are you, Glenn? Is it not better just to make something that everybody thinks is okay? You sell more units.
I mean, if that's your primary concern. But no, look, you know, you're better off making something that some people absolutely go mad for and some people just don't touch, and be honest about what it is you've made and pre-warn the people who are going to hate it and wave a big stick at them and chase them away, and let the people who love your game absolutely love it, rather than try and make something that everybody thinks is passably acceptable, like, you know, a glass of tepid water. What's the single most important thing that you've learned from playtesting, Mike? Because you play. I tell you what. One last one. Most important thing I learned playtesting like miniature skirmish games is sitting up at 3 a.m. trying to make a romance mechanic work in one of my skirmish games, and just going, yeah, I'm incapable of this. It's beyond me, and letting it slide, letting it go. That's the most important lesson. What's the most important thing that you learned from playtesting, Mike, in our many interactions?
I think that the thing that I didn't know to begin with, but I've come to be completely comfortable with, is you go into a playtesting session and you expect to playtest a game, and at some point, sometimes the game collapses, and it's okay to stop playing, put down your dice and tape measures, and just spend the remaining 2 hours discussing what went wrong. And that can often be as valuable as pushing through to the end of a ghastly game because there's some broken mechanic in it. So I think be okay with that. Like, stop, put tools down, and talk about what went wrong. That's okay.
No, yeah, absolutely. And again, I think it's, you know, you need to respect and believe in the people you got play testing for you,
and also not like force them to go through an additional 2 hours of god awful nonsense.
That, but I meant because, you know, when you sit there and have that hour and a half, 2 hour long conversation where you set the world and your game to rights, it's worth having people around you who
also enjoy that
in.
And yeah.
that you believe in and believe have valid.
Well, if you have watched this far into this video / podcast, I assume that you are also the person who would sit with me for 2 hours and set my game to rights. So thank you for that. If we ever get the opportunity to.
Yes, absolutely.
Glenn, what should they do next?
Sorry?
What should they do next, Glenn?
They should like and subscribe.
Yes, they should.
They should like and subscribe. If you stuck with us this far, I tell you what, there's a decent possibility that some people watching this video are some of the people who have play tested Gaslands and A Billion Suns,
or Perilous Tales,
or Perilous Tales. And you know what? If you haven't, they're available to play test right now. Perilous Tales is available to play test right now on Mike's website. We'll put a link below it. If you want to learn how to play test, you know, to make people do play tests, it's a good idea to learn to be a play tester.
I also have a new Gaslands expansion that's currently on the workbench ready to play test, and I have a new A Billion Suns expansion that's also ready to play test. So if you comment in the thingy below, then that will let me know that you want to get involved, because I'm going to create secret Facebook groups for both of those expansions.
Fantastic. Well, if there's not a more rewarding prize for having stuck with us this far through the video, I can't think of one. So yes, if you'd like to be part of some of that play testing, drop us a comment in the sections below. Yeah, like and subscribe. I assume if you
literally cannot say that enough.
Yeah, no, but yeah, apparently not. Yeah, if you were one of the people who have play tested one of our games, let us know how you found the experience. Thank you.
What was the worst thing about that playtesting experience? That's what I want to know.
How monstrous was Mike as an overlord to deal with as you were giving up your valuable personal out with something that he was doing. But personal bitterness aside, like and subscribe. Yes.
Okay. You find us on social media, but we need to go.
Yeah, you can find us on social media. This has been a video. It's also available as a podcast. Other than that, we will see you next time on Rule of Carnage. And goodbye. Thank you very much.
Bye.